old football adage is the biggest change in a team occurs between week 1 and week 2. That change is not necessarily always good. We know we have 3 elite teams, or are pretty sure, but after this weekend, might we say 4 have proven that? And dumb loses more than smart wins until smart figures out a way to win. This is the College Game Day Podcast for Monday, September 9th. Rece Davis, Pete Thamel, Ryan McGee. And, I think that we expected that week 2 outside of Texas, Michigan might be sort of mundane, at least at the top. And then all of a sudden, right after the big victory on the road for Notre Dame, here come the Irish. Schedule all wide open for them, at least until they get to Florida State. And that suddenly looked wide open. Okay, then until they get to USC. But in between there, who in the world might slow down the Irish? Here come the Irish to a home playoff game. Here come the Irish. Here come the Irish down the tubes to Northern Illinois. As I always say, Pete Thamel, if you aren't good enough, what happens?
A loss will find you.
A loss will find you. And a loss found Notre Dame on a lethargic performance, one in which their seemingly impenetrable defense was penetrated at the clutch times by Northern Illinois. And their first win over a top 10 team comes in Notre Dame Stadium in an emotional finish for Thomas Hammock.
I think Saturday was just like a wall-to-wall reminder, like from that noon block right till Boise ended at last call when Oregon beat them on a field goal, of how great college football is. Because we sit around and we set these conventions, and then for 8 months, and then they become beliefs, and then they become facts. And like the fact sets just all blew up all afternoon. We had some awesome games in the noon window. We had some great late night games. It was just this was like the college football fans weekend. This wasn't I'm going to moonlight in and watch USC play Notre Dame. No, this was like, if you are dialed into Tulane, trying to upset K-State. It was that kind of weekend. So hats off to Northern Illinois, Thomas Hammock. He had a much-deserved moment going viral with his locker room speech.
Listen, what you can do with the power of belief and working together and just staying through it, through thick and thin. That's what we are. That's a team. That's a family. That's guys that want it. I told you all week, we did not need luck.
I texted with him this morning, Rece. He said he had more than 400 texts and emails. His favorite from Aaron Boone. He's a lifelong Yankees fan. And Aaron Boone, our old colleague, Aaron Boone, checked in to wish that. And he said that got him pretty fired up to hear from the pinstripes manager. They returned to campus. They got a police escort the last 20 miles. And the student center in the middle there, the home student center, the biggest building on Northern Illinois campus, is just a beacon of red, right? You can see it in the cornfields as you're driving to DeKalb on 88 from like miles away. And, a night that school will never forget. So hats off to Thomas Hammock. Just a really, really cool moment in time there.
Northern Illinois ran the ball 45 times. That's and didn't turn the ball over. Went into South Bend, did not turn the ball over, and ran it 45. That one was a stunner, and I was in attendance for 2 stunners over the weekend, and that was still the one. I didn't think anyone. I didn't see the outcomes coming of the games I went to, but that one was the one that at both of the games, the buzz is starting at the first game where I was, and then by the time I got to the second game, that one was over, and that's all I'm talking about. And so it's. Yeah, you guys know me. I'm a sucker for, I call them the Gang of Five. I'm a sucker for when a 1AA, or what I still call 1AA, when an FCS team knocks off anyone, in FBS. I think it's good for the game. It's not good if you're a Notre Dame fan. You said it. I mean, their road to that 5th spot in the playoff was done. Like, it was over. We all agreed that it was. But I think it's good for college football when these things happen. And it happened a lot. And yeah, you're right, Pete. We all looked at week 2 and went, nah. You kind of look at week 3, and there's certainly highlights. But week 2 was a warning. We're all talking about, well, once we get to week 5, man, it's really going to take off. No. It's taking off now. And thank you, college football, for that.
Is Notre Dame dead in the playoff, Rece? Is this punitive? No. Okay. No. This is not a punitive loss. Like, this is not.
Oh, it is. It might ultimately cost them a home playoff game. as you start, doing the comparative things at the end. But we are so far away from the end. You don't know exactly how it's going to play out. And here's what I mean. What if, for instance, what if Florida State rights the ship? What if Notre Dame wins, the rest of their games, only loses one more or something? Maybe everybody's got outside of the ultra elite, have 2-3 losses. What if Notre Dame, only loses one more, doesn't lose again? Florida State gets things fixed. USC is in the mix in the Big Ten, maybe even makes the Big Ten championship game, or they are a playoff contender themselves. Notre Dame beats them. And then the most important factor of it, what if Northern Illinois winds up being the MAC champion and they are in the mix for the highest ranked group of 5 champion? Whether they get it is sort of immaterial, not to them, but at least in terms of Notre Dame's case. Maybe they'll turn out to be pretty good, and if they are, then all of a sudden it's still an upset. It's still a bad loss at home after you win the big road game, but it's not an inexplicable one. On the flip side, if Northern Illinois winds up being 5-7, then that'll be a detrimental case because it's just one game. You can't put too much emphasis on it. But I think that one of the things the committee does and should evaluate is not just what you're capable of when you're at your best, but what you're capable of when you are at your worst. If Notre Dame had played poorly, if Notre Dame had sort of slopped around like Penn State did, not putting Bowling Green away and won the game, you kind of excuse that. But might you lose those games? And if so, that has to be, doesn't have to be disqualifying, but it has to be a mark against you. I don't think they're done, but it certainly hurts their overall case. Another on the opposite end of the spectrum, I think is Michigan after the Texas game. Now, one thing, I'm pretty convinced that Texas and Georgia are a cut above everyone except Ohio State. And the reason I just put Georgia, Texas at the top, Ohio State right behind is because Ohio State hasn't played anyone yet. Not that it's only been 2 weeks, not that not many people have played ultra elite competitive games the way, Texas and Michigan played, Georgia and Clemson, and a handful of others. I think Ohio State's in that realm too. Michigan's problems seem deep enough that it wasn't that loss itself that would be playoff disqualifying, but a signal of things that it appears that they'll have a difficult time fixing to win enough games to be in playoff consideration. I think, Pete, on the podcast, you and I both said they felt like an 8-4 type team this year. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I see from them right now. They look like an 8-4 team, probably not in contention for the playoff unless they have an absolute turnaround in the coming weeks.
So I think it's safe to say 2 weeks in, this is a bridge year at quarterback. Like 2 years from now, we're talking about Michigan. We're like, yeah, remember that year that they had Davis Warren and then they run an orgy on third down? Like, I think they epitomize the adage, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. That's the very early read. Now, look, as Rece Davis would say, we're gonna give them a window to get better. They're not allowed to not evolve. It was interesting here in the Fox broadcast of just how little football Davis Warren has played, because obviously of COVID, battled cancer. He just hasn't played a ton of snaps. They were talking about why he was still in there at the end of the game. But I feel like some of this Michigan is a hangover for the timing of when Jim Harbaugh left for the Chargers. They brought in a few guys from the portal, Preeb, the interior O lineman, Barham, the linebacker, but they did not address their needs. Like, we're losing 18 guys to the combine. They picked a little bit, but they have so many. You look at receiver, you look at O-line, like they needed more reinforcements. And it was a hard thing to go get a quarterback when your coach knows he's leaving, right? And that was essentially what we all knew. It was a matter of when and not if. And I feel like the championship game combined with the Harbaugh exit handcuffed them from channeling the momentum from the championship to going full-throated in the portal. There were some rumblings after the spring that they made a few overtures at some quarterbacks. Obviously, it didn't come to fruition. I think they knew a little bit of we're in pretty rough straits here. But I feel like outside of Colston Loveland, who did not have a great game on Saturday, but he's still the best tight end in the country, according to NFL scouts. I don't think his mishaps on Saturday changed that. They don't have weapons. They just simply don't have weapons. They have decent tailbacks, nobody to block for them. They have a below average Big Ten receiver group at this point. So I just don't think their very good defense can overcome that. If they are going to win games this year, and they will win some games, certainly, and 8-4, like we said in the preseason, is probably about right. They're gonna have to win like Michigan State used to win under Mark D'Antonio. And I know Michigan fans probably don't like that comparison, but they're gonna have to win, grind it out, punt, field position, run the ball, find an identity there. They are a team that lost 18 dudes to the NFL Combine, 13 guys to the draft, and just didn't have the horses to replace them.
Yeah, I'm surprised by the surprise. Like I wasn't really, to me, the bigger surprise was that I've been not reluctant, but I guess it's just PTSD with Texas. Like I'm not ready to go all in on them. They look like a team that you're ready to go all in on now. But I've been surprised at the surprise that Michigan struggled in that game, because all of that you just said, Pete, we knew going into the year. And I feel like the three of us have talked about it, but they got legacy votes for the top 25. They just did, based on what they've done. But the reality was, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are Georgia. I don't care if you are, even Alabama. You lose 18 guys off a national championship team and the coach leaves. There's no way you don't take a step backwards. And I've been surprised at the shock. Although it's funny watching social media, and it's not real life. I understand that. But watching Twitter, I knew Michigan wasn't very good. Well, no, because you wrote in your magazine that I have on my desk that you thought they'd be in the top 10. So it's but I just, the surprise over them being okay. I thought they were a Citrus Bowl team when going into the year, and it feels like if the college football fair came to them and said you could go to Orlando, they should take that right now. Thank you very much. I'll take my wins and play in Jacksonville, play in Orlando, play in the sunshine this summer, this January. To take that right now.
There's a fear in the preseason, especially if you're dealing with the defending champion, and especially in the recent era when you've seen defending champions just come back and reload. Alabama comes to mind. Georgia certainly has done it. Clemson and even though Ohio State didn't win again, they came back after the first college football playoff championship absolutely loaded. And I know there's a little difference when you lose a lot of players. Ohio State's probably a bad example. Some of those Alabama and Georgia teams are not bad examples. They lost a bunch of players coming in. There's a fear of saying a team that just won a championship is going to be awful. And I believe Michigan is still worthy of being ranked. So I think they're still a top 25 type team, largely because of their defense. They've got stars at every level of the defense. But you talked about being surprised, Ryan. I was surprised on game day, and I'm now going to take a moment on this podcast to tear my own rotator cuff, patting myself on the back. I was surprised that it was 3-3 on the Texas-Michigan pick. And, in Herb Street, because we had a few seconds, Herbie says, hey, look, you've got to break the tie. And so that, I go into this whole thing. I picked Michigan to win the national championship last year. This ain't last year. They are going to get rolled. And, that game played out about like I thought it would. Texas is legit. This is not the old Texas where they step on a rake and hit themselves in the face. Now, they flirted with that a few times last year, but they got past it. Sark has changed things there. They're elite. Are they unbeatable? Absolutely not. Everybody can play their B- game and get beat. I'm not saying Texas is invincible. I'm saying they've taken the next step. They're not. They're okay. Which Texas are we getting today? You know which one you're going to get. There will be levels of excellence that they play to, and when it's at the bottom scale of that, they're vulnerable, like everybody in the whole history of college football. But they're in the upper tier, and I'm not so sure that, if you'll pardon the terminology, Mr. Volunteer Graduate, that the other UT is not there too. Tennessee and Nico Iamaleava. There's craze about Nico and he is a fine prospect and an excellent quarterback, and and growing, has room for growth. And Tennessee needs some growth out of that offense and out of the receivers making plays down the field. That's not why Tennessee might be in that group with Texas and Georgia and probably Ohio State. It's the fact that they're rolling about a dozen dudes through that defensive front, all of whom aren't just big, wide bodies. They are rear end kicking, trouble making, havoc causers up front. Now, NC State is probably an average team like NC State typically is, but they're old up front, and they got absolutely butt kicked in Charlotte on Saturday night. And it wasn't just James Pierce. You got Joshua Josephs on the outside. Omari Thomas and Omar Norman Lott inside were devastating. Bailey and Tyree West on the outside. Number 20, Bryson Eason inside. I mean, they just keep rolling them in. Now, the problem with Tennessee's defense is that they lost 11 defensive backs last year, either to the pros or to the portal. Then they lost a projected starter for the season to injury in camp. So I asked Tim Banks, their defensive coordinator, leading up to the game. I said, what about your secondary? Are you worried about your secondary? And he said, a good secondary starts with a great front. Yeah. Tennessee's got a great front. And those guys in the back are talented, but they've got time now. They've got time to get better, and they don't have to cover for long. Not with those game records up front. So I'm still, as weird as this is going to sound, I need to see a little more development out of Nico. And I need to see a little more from the wide receivers. Everybody's all crazy about Nico, and they should be. He's going to be super and is getting there quickly. But the reason I'm in on the Vols now is that defensive front, because that defensive fronts tend to travel. And you know what? In Tennessee's case, if 3 or 4 of them didn't travel so well, we'll just run the next ones in. They're good too. And that's a really, really good. That's as strong a front. That's what we should have seen from Florida State, Pete. All your scout buddies that are talking about Florida State, have them go to Knoxville. That's where they're going to find some dudes. They're going to find some dudes in Knoxville up front.
Is this McGee's NIL money coming to fruition to his alma mater?
Yeah, maybe so. All the documentary money's been funneled into the defensive front.
That's it. See, all these years in this time machine, I've been going back and seeing all this. I've been collecting money, right? I've been playing the stock market. But like a lot of those names you mentioned for Tennessee on the front, they've been around a while. Like, I remember I was in Lexington for the start of the South Carolina Kentucky game, hauled freight to Knoxville, and was in the truck, or to Charlotte, was in the truck going in and listening to the pregame show. And my friend NC State network, we're talking about their veteran offensive line, and I said out loud, to the radio, that's a pretty veteran defensive line, and it's true. And my feelings on Grayson McCall, the quarterback at NC State. And, of course, the quarterback at Coastal, the night of the legendary BYU game, I love that kid so much. And he'll be the first one to tell you, he was confused. And part of that was him running for his life, but part of it was the way Tennessee was playing defense. And so I think everyone that left that building, and if you were there too, you're right about Nico. He looked young a couple times. I mean, he airmailed one terrible interception.
He's really good. I mean, I'm not saying he's not good. He's really good.
But he has the chance to be really, really great. And but meanwhile, what a quarterback's best friend is someone who can run the ball and someone who can play defense. And I think they've got that. And Brew McCoy, thank goodness, looks great. That's a guy that's overcome a ton injury wise. And you're right. But it's funny too, because I'm not surprised. And this isn't the alum talking. This is the college football reporter talking. I'm not surprised that Tennessee looked as good as they did. I was surprised that they put that game away like they did. I'm surprised because I think NC State, and I still think they have a chance to crash the ACC party because I think that their upside, I think, is great. But I was
Northern
shocked.
Illinois comes to town later this month.
Yeah.
Yes,
no,
yes, they do.
Suddenly, suddenly a game that might determine college football playoff berth. but Tennessee fans should be very excited. But it's as some old boy sitting behind me said, sitting in section 345, he said, "I am so excited, but I never let myself get that excited." And that is a man that I know who watched Tennessee football his whole life.
I think.
Are you ready to put the Vols at least on the edge of the Georgia, Texas, Ohio State discussion? Need to see a little more?
After the pick six in that game, it unwound so fast. So even though there was exquisite play-by-play and analysis in that game, I can't say I watched much of the second half because there was chaos popping everywhere. Right? It was one of those. It was one of those nights. I really thought my judgment of Tennessee would come in Norman, but my gosh, did I watch Oklahoma just sputter around the field against Houston the other night? Now, again, they're down a bunch of receivers right now, and they clearly lack some skill and some pop at Oklahoma. But I do think the path is opening up for Tennessee a little bit to take some momentum, build it. And I want to say they have Alabama in early October, Ryan. Is that right?
Third Saturday in October as dictated in Leviticus.
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
And Georgia in the middle of November. Like that's one I keep harping about Georgia's schedule, but to me it's not just about. Of course, I kept talking about the tough trip to Kentucky. We'll see, but the fact that they get Auburn, who look terrible, but they still get Auburn first weekend in October. They get Tennessee the middle of November, which is weird. That's not how it's always been, and so. But yeah, so for Tennessee, I think you're catching people at the right time.
Yeah, and that game's in Knoxville, correct? The Bama game.
Yeah, the Alabama game's in Knoxville. The Georgia
2 years
game's
ago,
in
we were in Knoxville for that just banger of a game. Field goal, walk off, runoff, right, Rece?
Yeah, and the great escape, Ryan. You may know this story. Pete and I saw every second of that game. We saw the field goal go through the uprights, and thanks to Rachel, we sprinted up the tunnel. Rachel, one of our great. What's the right title? Production assistant, runner. She does a lot.
Coordinator.
One of the production coordinators. Ran up the tunnel. Didn't get caught in the melee on the field. Didn't get caught in the traffic. Boom, out, escape. Brilliance, absolute brilliance, and one of the perks of doing the job that we do. So
yeah, I was your people. I as soon as the game was over with, I took off my work hat. And ESPN.com went, "You're clear." And I go, "Great." And I don't really remember a lot of the rest of the night. There's a picture of me somewhere on the strip smoking a cigar, but I was off the clock at that point, Rece, so it was okay.
Your people seem to enjoy the homage I sent to John Ward at the end of the Will Brooks pick six call. They seem to enjoy that. Got a lot of positive feedback, which is not typical for the feedback that anyone in the media gets from Tennessee fans typically. So I was grateful for that.
Give us a dollop of it, Rece. Give us a taste.
Well, the great John Ward, legendary voice of the Vols, who would start the broadcast, and Ryan can probably tell you specifically, but he would start the broadcast, one of the great opening calls. It's football time in Tennessee. But he would often call touchdowns as they were going in. He would go, his touchdown call was give him 6. And sometimes he would call it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, give him 6. And it's, it's a great call. And so it was in the memory bank. It was there. I didn't say I'm going to do it, but it was a big pivotal play. NC State was, scrapping around, trying to stay in the game. And then McCall, floats. It looks like they might even tie the thing. McCall floats his pass. It's going the other way. And it just popped out. And so I'm glad people enjoyed it because as I told our friend, Brett Edgerton, who when he was a Tennessee grad, when he was our researcher for College Football Final in studio way back in the day for a number of years, I called him Smokey. And he, sent along a nice note. And I said, Smokey, I like to shout out the people who love it the way we do. And John Ward loved it the way we do. And, it's cool. So, I love Pete, I love Larry Munson at Georgia and John Ferguson at LSU way back in the day when I was a little kid. So you get a chance to shout those guys out a little bit. It's kind of fun. So
that's I think said. That could be the tagline of this podcast for the people who love it the way we do. I think that's very well said. So,
but I do want to take a little trip to Negative Town because of something that you brought up with Oklahoma. with Auburn, with Alabama to a degree, because I know everybody wanted Alabama to stomp them for the whole game, but troubling signs for Alabama. But you also have to give them credit for being able to score 4 touchdowns, like boom, 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 bye. So they get credit for that too, as much as you get critique for the early. Arkansas finding a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And who am I leaving out? Certainly the week 1 teams, the Floridas, LSU, Texas A&M. They say it just means more in the SEC, but that hasn't meant much, having that SEC patch on your uniform for most of the teams in some of these non-conference games. So my position on this, guys, is that it is incumbent on the committee, which I think they will try to do, but not to subconsciously be sucked into, well, they played an SEC schedule, or even they played a Big Ten schedule, which by definition, subconsciously sometimes can be greater than the Big 12 or the ACC schedule. Not sure it is. Now, some of them will be. Georgia's will be, because Georgia plays all these teams that might be the elite. The other ones, maybe not. So it's the SEC's taken some on the chin in these non-conference games. They've had some great wins at the top for sure. Georgia beating Clemson, Texas beating Michigan, and to a lesser degree, but it may be the way they beat them. Tennessee beating North Carolina State, but they've had some losses too, and they've had some middle of the pack losses. And you've had scares like Oklahoma didn't possess the ability to do what Alabama did and, score a couple and put it away right at the very end. It's a little shaky. I think it's a little shaky below the top, or maybe not shaky. It's like everywhere else below the top.
I went to SEC Media Days, Rece, and every SEC team was going to go undefeated. So I don't know what you're talking about. I listened, and there was a clear path in Dallas.
I host a show on the SEC Network. I had the script. They were all supposed to be undefeated at this point. But
everybody listening, because we value the intelligence for our podcast. McGee's kidding.
Of course I'm. Yeah, you know what?
I know you are, but Ryan McGee said they gave him a script.
I'm glad you clarified, because that will definitely show up somewhere. Yeah.
I heard him say it with his own mouth.
I worked for NASCAR for a little bit, so I know all about predetermined outcomes, right?
So let's start with Auburn, because that to me was the most interesting. Nick Saban predicted Auburn to be the most improved team in the SEC. They hung 73 on their opening day opponent. So they lose to Cal at home. And Jaden Ott, who's Cal's first team All Pac-12 running back, potential All-American this year, was a non-factor. He had an ankle injury. He warmed up. He played. He carried the ball 10 times for 18 yards, but he did not factor in that football game. So I just really think Peyton Thorne is still their quarterback, and Peyton Thorne's a fine college quarterback. But the thought that he was going to go on some Joe Burrow jump or some jump of some of these guys who've played a couple of years in a system. Another thing everybody said was Hugh Freeze is calling plays now. So they're going to just march up and down the field unabated. And that just simply that just didn't happen. Now, give Cal credit. They made some big plays. They forced some big turnovers. Cal went there and made a stand. But I really think my dominant emotion out of that game is just disappointment that Auburn maybe isn't a little further along right now at this point in the Hugh Freeze era.
Well, and do not underestimate the emotion attached to an SEC versus ACC conference matchup.
Hey, Cal's 2-0 in its last 2 trips to the SEC. I think they joined the wrong league. They beat Ole Miss the last time they were in an SEC stadium.
That's right. That's right. I forgot about that.
No, it's chaos, man. And then I mentioned a couple of times I was at Kentucky. We did the show there, and it was, you talk about predetermined outcomes. Everyone just kind of was operating like they're already talking about Georgia. And, our show was over at noon, and we went out and tailgated for a couple hours with Cash Daniels, and everybody stopping and talking to us. And it was like, well, what do you think about Georgia next week? And I'm not exaggerating when I say at least a half a dozen fans were like, I think game day should put the set here. That's the morning that was happening. And that game was over in 15 minutes. And so it was to your point, Rece, it is a very through the looking glass season everywhere, but particularly in the SEC. But the reality is you can't turn rosters over like you're turning them over right now. And you can't just plug in a Brock Vandagriff, who's great, but you can't just plug in the transfer and everyone just assume they're Joe Burrow, to your point, Pete. So it's an interesting time. And now, the unease now in Auburn. Like I was listening to our friends over in satellite radio as I was driving up the mountain yesterday with my wife, and they're already talking about, all right, let's scrap this quarterback thing and let's start thinking about 2025. It's week 2.
Walker White.
It's week 2. Yeah. Walker White, not the guy from Breaking Bad.
Walker White's a great SEC quarterback name. He's I remember when he committed, Freeze was over the moon. He said he was like the perfect guy for his system. He's from Arkansas, correct?
Yep.
Originally. And yes, God bless. No fan base over panics like Auburn, right? Like they are just, that is the beauty of that fan base. And so,
and God bless them. But they do drama better than anyone else in the world.
Amen. Amen to that. Can't fire the offensive coordinator though.
No. Not every quarterback becomes Joe Burrow in his second year. And I know Peyton Thorne in Auburn's case is in his second year. Brock Vandagriff may take a little more time for Kentucky, but I'd like to call attention to things I saw that people forget. I saw a Joe Burrow quarterback team score 19 points and lose. I saw him score 19 against an average Mississippi State team and hang on to win. And I saw them score 0 points with Joe Burrow at quarterback against Alabama, 0 points. And then the second year, I saw them cut Texas to pieces. I saw them run up and down the field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Now, I'm not suggesting Kentucky and Brock Vandagriff going to turn into Joe Burrow and all those great receivers and national championship. But it's a great point that you guys make. You can't just plug them in every time. Sometimes you can, but when you do, you should look up, be thankful for it, praise the guy to be able to come in 1 year and do it and not expect it. It's hard. It's hard to play at this level against these great teams. It's hard. And I'm not just talking SEC here. I'm talking anybody, trying to plug in the new guy. It's hard at Michigan. Davis Warren hasn't played a lot. Alex Orji is wildly talented, but he's got some development to do in terms of, commanding the position. And people think it's some type of insult, but how about you've got to be a game manager first? Joe Burrow was great. He was a game manager first, and of all people, Cam Newton, the ultimate plug-in and one guy who I still believe, hands down, far and away, no competition, had the greatest single season of any quarterback I've ever seen. And in college football history, he managed the game, first. And then his prodigious talent, took over after that. You got to give it some time to develop. Everybody's not Cam Newton. Everybody's not even Joe Burrow, who took a second year, to get it going. And, I think that is one thing on the flip side of the transfer portal, especially with quarterbacks. Okay, we need a quarterback. We got to get one in here. Oh, no, it didn't work. We'll see another one. I'm not sure Wisconsin's at that level, but Tyler Van Dyke, this week against Alabama is coming in. Wisconsin's just been, been okay, on offense. And it's, it takes a little time sometimes, and that's okay. It's not okay to fans, but that is why there's also value in developing Carson Beck, in developing Miller Moss, in developing Garrett Nussmeier, guys who have come along and even, I'll give you another example. How about Jason Bean? Last year sat there, waited, got his chance, played when Jalen Daniels got hurt, and he plays pretty well for Kansas. We're not talking about playoff level team. We're talking about a guy been around, didn't get mad when he wasn't the starter, found a way to use him, play. It's takes time to develop those guys.
And it's a good transition, Rece, to a game you probably didn't get to catch much of because you were calling a game and Ryan was obviously at a game. I spent a pretty good amount of my Saturday night watching Colorado, Nebraska. Now, this is not the quarterback position, but this is the roster, right?
Yeah.
Like we've said this on the podcast many times, you can't microwave an offensive line, right? Colorado's offensive line got manhandled by Nebraska. Simply put, they couldn't run the ball. They can't run the ball. They haven't run the ball the entire time there. And that's with defenses, preparing for Shedeur to throw it around the lot. And what Nebraska was like the epitome of retention. I don't think they had a player that really transferred out of any heft from there. And you have guys like Tommy Hill has the huge pick six to start the game. He's a veteran guy who stuck around, who's going to be a first-round pick. Yeah, Ty Robinson just blowing through Colorado's offensive line for sacks and TFLs all night. And I thought that game represented a collision of two ways to build programs. There is the microwave way to build the program that Coach Prime has tried 2 nuke cycles, and there's obviously the build cohesiveness way that Matt Rule did it at Temple and did it at Baylor. And that was like what did it end up, 28-10? That felt a lot more like 48-10. They were just kind of taking the air out of the ball in the second half at Nebraska. So it will be very interesting to see where Colorado goes from here. But that was they laid a dinosaur egg in Lincoln. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah, and I was there for you guys for day, Tuesday and Wednesday, and had a chance to sit down with Travis Hunter, who I think the world of that kid. Anyone who knocks him needs to actually sit down and talk with him, and had a chance to talk to Shedeur for a minute. But seeing the team in the building, they're not big. Travis Hunter's a lot of things. He's not big. Like, it's not a big football team. And so, yeah, you got to build that through the thing. And it was interesting too. We made such a big deal out of the kind of the fundamental differences between what way Clemson builds a football team and the way Georgia builds a football team. I felt the same about Nebraska and Colorado. And Deion said as much. The way Matt Rule does it and the way we do it. And I respect the way he does it. But this is how we do it. And at least in the short term, it was pretty obvious on Saturday which was which.
Obviously you look at, and Nebraska needed the quarterback, and they got Dylan Raiola, and he looked good, got a fortuitous bounce on one of those. And a little shout out to my buddy Pete Thamel on the pick six that Nebraska had. The first thing I thought was Pete reminded me to get into game day that he didn't play in the game last year against who was it that had the pick six?
Tommy Hill had it. He only played like a dozen snaps. He got hurt in that game.
He got hurt in that game, and we mentioned in game day. So Pete gets the assist on that one for sure. But at the risk of going overboard, because Pete knows I've said this many times on the podcast, I think Deion Sanders is a good, tough, hard-nosed, old-school football coach at his core. I also think Colorado's now at a point where they've sort of got an existential crisis, because they've got a quarterback who is going to be a first-round pick, who's a very talented guy, and they've got the best football player in the country all around in Travis Hunter. Yet the rest of it, hasn't developed yet, and doesn't show a lot of signs of doing so this year. And then those guys are going to be gone. And now what are you going to do?
Yep.
Now do you have the energy and the time and the disposition to go at it the way Matt Rule did and build it for a little more sustainability? It's a really delicate time for Colorado. How they handle the rest of the season. Can Deion, and I think he can, because I think Deion's a good coach. I do. But you can be as good a coach as you want. If you can't protect and you can't really impact on the defensive line with the types of bodies like you were talking about, Ryan, you can be as good a coach as you want to. It's not going to happen, at least not at the level that you hope it happens. I think really, really pivotal time for Colorado that will really come to a head at the end of the season when, as we assume that Shedeur and Travis head on to the NFL. What's Colorado do now? And Bears watching the rest of the season to see how they go.
Saturday night in Fort Collins. Be careful.
Oh, and they'll be very angry, because last year that was a great game. Colorado unbelievable comeback. Colorado State should have had them. There was the kerfuffle, in the days leading up over
Skippy game,
yeah.
if you remember.
It was awesome, is what it was. Yeah, it was tremendous.
It was fun. It was a fun game. Very, very highly rated game for that late window on ESPN.
Didn't it double
night?
the rating in that window? It was a wild number. That was like the peak of Dion, and just I remember going to the playground in South Boston the next morning, and the moms were talking about watching Colorado State. And I'm like, where am I? Like, what happened? Did I move? This is an alternate universe.
But that's my favorite rivalries are the one that means so much in that corner of the world, and the rest of the nation maybe doesn't get it. But then when the rest of the nation gets a taste of it, like, it's just, I love watching the rest of the nation go, oh, this is amazing. I live in the heart of the Sun Belt, right? I mean, these teams have hated each other since they were all in the Southern Conference together in the 70s and 80s in 1AA. And so when the nation gets a taste of Appalachian State hates Coastal because they're new money. And, I just think that's right. So when Colorado State, which is a game that I used to love watching at 1 o'clock in the morning, in my dorm, when the nation gets a taste of that and it means something, I just think that's awesome.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground for the past weekend, and we've got a lot ahead in the coming days, but we also need to bring you a best in game moment. And I'm going to say best in game, as much as we've talked about the big picture of it, for me was Quinn Ewers this past week. Quinn Ewers looked like a Heisman Trophy level quarterback of a team that can win a national championship. And in that, as one guy on the Michigan sideline said to me, this is Ohio State level noise around early. And Quinn was sitting out there like he was spending a little 7-on-7 in mid-July on the 40 acres, and just dropping dimes in there, standing in. Good protection helps you do that for sure, but just the confidence, the ease with which it comes out of his hand, the whole demeanor that kept the offense going, dropping, even the touchdown that got called back, just kind of buying a little time, dropping the thing in the end zone in the middle of the first quarter. I mean, to me, that performance was sensational. I think Quinn Ewers was best in game, and he will be helping the Texas world keep promises, if you will. Guys, before we get out of here, we got to do dumb loses more than smart wins, with the addendum that until smart wins. On Friday night, if you were watching two of the Brainiac schools, two of the really smart schools, Duke and Northwestern, play each other, second half was sort of the epitome of frustration. And it was dumb, not in a sense of if anybody did anything really bad, but it was just sort of a dumb game. Second half, I should say, went blocked punt, missed field goal, interception, fumble, loose rabbit on the field. And then we had a bunch of punts, downs, punt, missed field goal, punt. And then finally they went to overtime, where suddenly, because sometimes smart comes back, both teams all of a sudden went into this offensive brilliance until the Fighting Manny Diaz's finally won. So sometimes a game's just dumb, even with smart kids. And you go, what? Field goal, punt, downs, punt, fumble, rabbit, can't catch the rabbit gets away, game doesn't get away, overtime victory for the Blue Devils. And I said it that way because that particular emphasis on that syllable from some announced teams absolutely drives Duke fans crazy. But I thought the Blue Devils, lunch pail effort, game notes at the end, had a lot of things that went under the radar that gave them a good process that led them to victory. That is double, triple inside Duke reference, and I hope you enjoyed it, guys. Thanks. This was a lot of fun. We'll do it again the rest of the week on Wednesday. Our excellent producer Adrian tells Pete and Ryan and me that we're going to start being on ESPN2 from time to time and a simulcast of this podcast, so we look forward to that. We will look ahead to put on that big smile, Pete, for those of you watching on YouTube right now when you get the opportunity to do it. This Game Day podcast is about to go wild, so you better subscribe right now so you never miss an episode, or download it wherever you prefer to get your podcast.